Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux here with a review for Star Trek Generations. This is the first feature film after the original crew sailed off to that second star on the left and straight on till morning. And this is kind of a weird film in that I have a lot of conflict with it, I think as many people do. It's not regarded as a particularly good film, and I think there's a couple of reasons as to why. But I'm going to talk to you about it in three kind of levels. The first level I'm going to talk to you about it is the first time I saw it. The first time I saw Star Trek Generations, I'd never seen an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. I was coming at this film from the fandom of the original series of films. And as a sequel to the original crew, this film just doesn't work. I was really elated to see in the beginning of the movie the Kirk was back, but it wasn't only Kirk. You got to see Scotty, and you got to see Chekhov as well, and there was even a Sulu on the bridge. And it kind of had little beats of many of the previous Star Trek films where the old crew's coming on board the ship to send it off to a new crew. This time you truly believed that's what was happening. And then a chaotic event comes and steals Kirk away, and you're meant to believe that he is dead. And then the film serves, that's really just the first 15 minutes. The remainder of the movie is dedicated to the new crew, and as an introduction to the new crew, I don't think this movie works particularly well. Like, there's a couple characters you get to know, but they write Picard as very kind of angry and self-serious and stuff. Now, if you'd watched the show, you knew that he'd grown beyond that, and this is kind of an earlier incarnation of Picard, but he is thrust back into his memories of family and stuff like that. Anyway, we'll touch on that aspect in a little bit, but you got a very stern Picard, not the fun Kirk. And yeah, it's painting two different types of captaincy, but it wasn't in a compelling way. And then you touch on Riker, but you don't really get much character out of Riker. You get a lot of fun stuff with Data, and little bits with like Geordi and stuff like that, but a lot of the characters are just kind of flat and stagnant. You don't get a lot of the fun that the Next Generation show had. So I think as a introduction to this new crew, it just really didn't work for me. And so the first time I saw this film, I really didn't like it. I'm going to hit you guys with spoilers from here on out, but the film also concludes with Kirk's death, which I think is very anticlimactic. I remember that the first time I saw it, I thought he was going to die at some point, but I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. But the way he goes out is just so ignominious. It's just so like pointless and meaningless, and it holds zero weight. That's how I felt the first time I saw it. So the first time I saw this movie, I remember keeping a log. When I first watched the Star Trek movies, I had a notebook that I had gotten just the summer prior, and I would write down the name of the movie, a star rating, the 5 stars in it, who directed it, and who wrote it. Those were the 5 things that I had included. And I remember when I got to this film, I gave it 1.5 stars, which is a pretty harsh review, coming off of a then 3.5 star Star Trek 6. It's also fun to note that, this is a little sidebar, back when I was reviewing Star Trek II Wrath of Khan, I almost didn't rent that movie because I hated the first movie so much, but my dad was like, you should rent Star Trek II. So I rented Star Trek II, and I loved it so much that I went to the video store the next day, and I got, because they had the 5-movie deal thing, I got the next 5 movies. Star Trek 3, 4, 5, 6, and Generations. This was the last of the set that I watched in quick succession. Over the 3 days, I watched movies 3 through 7. And this one I thought was easily the worst of those bunchings. So much so that I almost didn't get First Contact, but I'd heard so many good things that I decided to keep up. I'd learned my lesson from Wrath of Khan. Anyway, that was a sidebar tangent. I came to this movie many, many years later. Almost, I think it was 10 years later. The next time I saw this movie was right before Star Trek Into Darkness was coming out. I decided to do a series rewatch. So that was only the second time I'd seen the movie. By that point, I had seen the rest of the Next Generation movies, and I'd seen a smattering of episodes of the shows. And I responded a little better to the movie, but I didn't love it by any stretch of the imagination. I think I would have bumped my star rating up to 2 stars at that point. Coming to it this time around, having watched it immediately after watching the original run of the Next Generation all the way through and then immediately launching directly into Generations, this is the time I got the most enjoyment out of the movie. But the criticisms that are there, that have always been present, still kind of hang firm and hard, which is, if you've never seen the original, or the Next Generation series, this isn't a great introduction to those characters. If you've lived with the Next Generation crew for a while, seeing them on a much bigger budget, a much bigger scale, and seeing how some of those dots get connected to how a originally stern, but slowly mellowing, especially after the end of All Good Things, Captain Picard gets confronted with information that is truly damaging to him, and he becomes stern once more until it takes Kirk to kind of pull the brightness back out of him. That stuff plays better. It's still a really wicked shift going from what my favorite episode of the Next Generation series is to this episode. It's still a sliding scale downwards, but I had more appreciation for how Picard was written. I really love this stuff with Data. Now, if you watched my Next Generation breakdown, you know that I'm not a huge Data fan. I think he is put to great use in many of these movies. This one probably being my favorite use of Data in the movies. Him being confronted with the emotion chip, how it works, having real stakes and emotion for the first time and engaging with them is great. That's where this movie has always worked the strongest. I love that stuff. I do like the stuff that we get with Geordi LaForge, the little beats we get with Worf. Gates McFadden's Crusher has a little bit to do in this movie. She really probably doesn't have much to do almost at all in the later movies, so seeing her do something in this was kind of nice. Deanna Troi was very underwritten in this movie, which is disappointing because she's such a great character. She has the one moment where she shares her empath powers with Picard and allows him to release the inner turmoil of his dead family member. And that's really her only shining light. But my favorite part of this movie has always been Guinan. I love Guinan. This was my introduction to Guinan. Obviously, I'd never watched the show the first time I saw it. And Whoopi Goldberg plays that role so well, but for her to be the information machine to the audience of what the Nexus is, she plays it so wonderful, and you feel that joy that she describes when discussing the Nexus ribbon. And I loved her, and every single time I watch this movie, all 3 times now that I've seen it, she is the absolute highlight. Her performance is tremendous. And it's because of this movie that I fell in love with that character. And it's a shame that we really only get to see her, I think, 2 more times. We get to see her in, if memory serves, she has a cameo in Nemesis, and then she has her brief periods in Picard Season 2. But this is kind of my farewell to the character of Guinan, which is a shame. She's my favorite thing about the Next Generation era. The special effects in this movie are also great. There is a huge leap from watching those first 6 movies to watching this one, with even the introduction of the spinning bottle that breaks on the side of the ship. You get to see sort of the older style of how they made their ships that connects it directly to the Kirk and crew movies. And then it juts forward 78 years, and we get to see our next generation ship in its full splendor, cinematic glory. And the special effects, especially when the saucer section separates and crash lands into the planet, are great. It is fabulous. I also think Soran, or however you want to say his name, he is great. I think he is one of the best Star Trek villains. Even though the movie itself is not particularly good, I think he is one of the best drawn cinema villains for this franchise. He's not as good as Khan was, but nobody will be. However, I do think he stands side by side with, say, like Nero, or even General Chang from the previous film. I think he works as a good antagonist for this story of a man so uncomplicated, he's just trying to get to that place where he needs to experience this elation and joy that has been absent from his life for so long. It's simple, but it makes sense, and it's motivated well. I like him. But the biggest problem with this film comes back to the Kirk side of things. As a film to bridge together two generations, it was brilliant tying Kirk and Picard together. That was a brilliant marketing strategy. The way it's executed is so bad because it doesn't feel like Kirk and crew in any sense of the way the dramatic story unfolds. Illustrated in multiple ways. I'm going to talk about two of them. The biggest one, the biggest hiccup in the world, is we've watched six prior movies of Kirk trying desperately to hold on to captaincy of the Enterprise. You see him in the first movie where he is invited on the bridge of the ship. He takes it over, as he does in the very beginning of this movie, and he demotes the acting captain so many times till that man just decides death over anything else. R.I.P. Captain Decker. Star Trek II Wrath of Khan, he is once more invited aboard the ship, as Saavik is the acting captain. Khan comes back, he goes back into the role. Star Trek III, he steals command of the Enterprise to go and rescue Spock. Star Trek IV, he is demoted himself from Admiral to Captain and is given the Enterprise. Star Trek V, we watch him as an acting captain of the Enterprise with one final true mission. Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, is the farewell, where he finally acknowledges that he is giving it back the last time, but goes on a joyride at the very end of the movie. Ever the Peter Pan. This movie, when he enters the Nexus ribbon, what should have been written is him being in control of the command of the bridge, which we saw in the beginning of the movie. So I have no idea why it's written that he is a rancher. And yeah, sure, it's the day he decided to go back to Starfleet. That's bull. Everything that was written wasn't written for Captain Kirk. It was written for William Shatner the man. If you know anything about William Shatner, he is a rancher. He is a guy that is just wants to be with his horses and out there cutting wood and being like kind of a Renaissance man, everyman. And that is what was written for Captain Kirk. But that's not Captain Kirk. That's William Shatner. And Shatner plays it beautifully. He does a great job because that's who he is. But it wasn't Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk should have been on the bridge of that ship during the Nexus. From that moment onwards, everything rung hollow. Because that to me was not Kirk. We'd spent 6 movies demonstrating how not Kirk that is. To have us spend 15 minutes on his ranch being told this is Captain Kirk, but knowing in the back of your mind that it's not. And then when you grow to learn more about William Shatner the man, read his biographies and stuff like that, you discover that this was written to entice Shatner. This was probably why he agreed to play it, so he could go horseback riding and stuff like that. And it just doesn't work. The other big thing, the stuff in the beginning of the ship, just doesn't feel right. And it makes so much more sense when you learn that they originally handed this screenplay to Leonard Nimoy to direct. That was how they were going to bring back the generations and tie the two together. The Next Generation crew with Captain Kirk and directed by Mr. Spock. But Spock read the script and said that they'd gotten the characters all wrong. You could interchange, originally the crew brought on board was Kirk, Spock, and Bones, which would make the most sense, and he said that the way those characters are written, anybody could play them. And as if to prove him correctly, they didn't change the dialogue, but they swapped out Mr. Spock with Scotty and Bones with Chekhov. And go back and rewatch the movie with that knowledge in mind, and Chekhov is acting like Bones the whole time. He's being a doctor. This man needs help, and all this kind of stuff. It's bonkers. And then Scotty is the dialogue. If you just listen to the dialogue, is definitely Mr. Spock oriented, but just done with the Scottish flair that James Doohan throws on top of it, and it's mind-numbing to know how firm of a handle the writers had on the Next Generation crew, that they could continue those storylines from the show, but how alien it felt when they were trying to do dialogue for Kirk and crew. And that's just the biggest stuff. So if you're coming at this from a fandom point of view of Kirk is your Star Trek, you're going to hate this movie. And his death, I still stand by, is done pretty meaninglessly. I think his performance of especially the oh my and then the dead face is quite strong. But, like, he should have gone out fighting and not just, like, falling. And it was such a dummy that clearly fell. Like, it just didn't feel like it had weight. This was not the proper send-off to Captain effing Kirk. It just wasn't. And it's a shame. Rant over. So where does that leave us? I enjoyed this movie the most this time around because I just spent so much time with Picard and his crew that seeing him come together for this mission that does feel like it has big dramatic scope, larger than any individual episode of the TV show. It earns itself as a movie in that sense, but the characters aren't truly written too well. I think they had a hard time balancing how many characters there were, which is weird because they had that balance pretty well in the show, but they really struggled with it in the movie. Riker's just there to bark, and he's my favorite character of the existing main series crew. Crusher does some things, but if you weren't familiar with her character, you'd think that she just was a glorified extra. Certainly Troi comes off that way, shy of that one brief mission moment. And I challenge you to remember, what was Worf's role in this film? It's hard to come up with it because his impact is so spare. It's just, he's just there. He's set decoration, as are most of the characters. And yet, it's because of I like them and I've spent so much time with them that I kind of gave it a pass this time around. It's a weird movie in that every time I've seen it, it has gotten minutely better, but the flaws are so grand, and if your fandom is truly that of original series, you probably are going to despise it, as I did the first time. So, I stick with my 2-star rating. It's not terrible, but it's also not good, and it should be better. That said, next week we will talk about a vastly superior film, Star Trek First Contact. Let me know what you think of Generations. I do know people that really do like this movie and have it as one of their 5 favorite movies. Traditionally, they are more next-gen fans, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about this one. Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.